She shut off the TV, pointed at the door, and told me to leave like I was nothing that I didn't argue. I didn't explain that I stayed quiet until the woman showed up the next morning. Hello, Golden Heart family. Before we begin, take a moment to breathe in and out, because today's story is one that touches the deepest corners of the human heart. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Golden Heart Stories for more emotional, soul-stirring narratives. Now let's begin. The television went black with a sharp click, like a slammed door. Not the dramatic kind, the final kind. Linda didn't look at me when she spoke. She stood with her back turned, arms crossed tight against her chest, the way people do when they're holding something they're afraid might spill out. Just go, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I've had enough. I stayed seated, not because I didn't hear her, because at 48, you learn the difference between noise and finality, and this felt like something in between. Like she wanted me gone, but also wanted me to fight. I didn't. I picked up my jacket from the arm of the couch, folded it once like it mattered, and stood. My chest felt heavy, but my face stayed calm. That had always been my flaw. Silence where other people used words that the door. I paused. Not to beg, just long enough to see if she'd turn around. She didn't. Outside, the November air bit through my shirt. The quiet of the suburban street felt louder than the argument we never really had. I sat in my car for a long minute, hands on the wheel, staring at a life that suddenly felt dismissed. Across town, far from quiet streets and modest homes, Grant Holloway watched a different kind of silence settle. His penthouse windows stretched floor to ceiling, the city glowing beneath him like something owned. At 52, Grant had built an empire people recognized by name alone. Steel, logistics, acquisitions, power measured in contracts and leverage. But tonight, the apartment felt hollow. The TV murmured in the background. Some late-night anchor talking about markets and scandals, but Grant wasn't listening. His tie lay discarded on the counter. His phone buzzed once. He ignored it. Another woman had left earlier that evening. Not in anger, in resignation. You're not unkind, she'd said gently, standing by the door. You're just unreachable. Grant hadn't stopped her. He never did. He muted the television, staring at his own reflection in the dark glass. A man who had mastered control but lost something quieter along the way. Something human. Back in my car, I finally started the engine. I didn't know where I was going yet. Just that staying felt worse than leaving. What I didn't know, what none of us ever know in moments like that, was that silence has consequences, and that the things we don't say have a way of arriving later, sometimes wearing a familiar face. Have you ever walked away from a moment you still don't fully understand, only to realize later it was setting something much bigger in motion that knock came just after 9 the next morning, not the polite kind, firm, certain, like whoever stood on the other side already knew. They'd be answered. Linda froze in the kitchen, one hand wrapped around her coffee mug. She hadn't slept. The couch still carried the faint indentation where I'd sat the night before, like the house itself hadn't caught up to her decision. She opened the door. The woman standing there didn't look angry. She didn't look smug either. She looked composed. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Clean coat. Soft makeup. The kind of presence that didn't ask for permission to be taken seriously. Linda Harris? The woman asked. Linda nodded, wary. Yes. My name is Elaine Holloway. I'm looking for Daniel. Linda's grip tightened on the mug. Why? Elaine exhaled slowly, like she'd rehearsed this moment more than once. Because he saved my life last night. And because I think you deserve to know who you told to leave. Linda felt the words before she understood them. Saved my life. Across town, Grant Holloway stood near the edge of a private hospital room, watching machines do what money couldn't guarantee. Elaine lay propped against white pillows, pale but awake. Her sister, his sister, was alive because a stranger on a dark roadside hadn't driven past. Did you get his name? Grant asked quietly. Elaine nodded. Daniel. He waited with me, kept me talking, held my hand when I couldn't feel my fingers. Grant swallowed. He imagined the scene too clearly. The rain, the hazard lights, the kind of moment that strips a man down to instinct. Find him, Grant said. Please. Back at the house, Linda set the mug down hard. He didn't tell me, she said, more to herself than to Elaine. Elaine's eyes softened. Men like him rarely do. Linda felt something twist, guilt, confusion, something heavier. The night before replayed in her mind. The TV. Her voice. The way he'd stood at the door without defending himself. What happened? Linda asked, her voice barely steady. Elaine hesitated. He stopped when no one else did. Silence filled the doorway, and somewhere in that silence, between regret and recognition, something irreversible shifted. That if this moment is landing heavy for you, don't rush past it. Stories like this only matter if someone stays with them. Golden heart stories exist for the quiet moments people don't talk about, and staying is its own kind of answer. Elaine handed Linda a folded card. If you see him, please tell him thank you. And tell him my brother wants to meet him. Your brother? Linda echoed. Elaine gave a small, sad smile. Grant Holloway. The name landed like a dropped plate. Linda watched Elaine walk back to her car, her chest tight, her certainty gone. For the first time since the night before, she wasn't sure she'd been right. And Daniel, wherever he was, had no idea that his silence had just collided with a world far bigger than he'd ever imagined. That I didn't go far, just far enough to feel displaced. The motel off. Route 9 smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. The kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as your card cleared. I sat on the edge of the bed, shoes still on, staring at the wall like it might explain how a life could fracture without raising its voice. Then my phone buzzed once. Linda, I let it ring. Not out of spite. Out of exhaustion. There are moments when answering feels like reopening a wound you just managed to close. Across the city, Grant Holloway sat behind a conference table that cost more than my car. 12 people waited for him to speak. Numbers glowed on screens. Futures shifted with his nod that he wasn't there. His mind kept replaying his sister's words. He stayed. He held my hand. Grant dismissed the room early. No explanations. No apologies. Power allowed that. By afternoon, Linda stood in her living room, Elaine's card pressed between her fingers. The house felt accusatory now. Too quiet, too aware. She replayed the night again, slower this time. The way I'd listened. The way I hadn't raised my voice. Her phone lay face down on the table. She didn't know what to say either. Resistance doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Like people circling the truth, hoping it will move first. Grant made the call himself. Daniel Harper, he said when I answered on the fourth ring. I straightened instinctively. Yes, this is Grant Holloway. My sister told me what you did. I waited. Old habits. Letting others fill silence. I'd like to thank you in person. You don't need to, I said. Anyone would have stopped. Grant's voice softened. They didn't. That landed. I'm not interested in anything else, I added quickly. No reward. A pause. Respectful. Calculated. Still, Grant said. Please. I agreed before I could overthink it. After the call, I stared at the ceiling, wondering why my chest felt tight. Again, Linda finally picked up her phone that evening. She typed. Deleted. Typed. Again. I was wrong. She didn't send it. Not yet. Because resistance isn't just fear of others, that it's fear of being seen, fully. And maybe too late. The rain had started again by the time I arrived at the hospital lobby. November in New York has a way of turning even glass towers into gray cages. I'd come because Grant's insistence wasn't optional. His sister's life wasn't a story I could ignore. Linda was already there, pacing in a corner near the elevators. Her arms crossed, shoulders tense, her eyes flicking over the polished floor as if it might give her an escape. When I spotted her, our gazes locked for a fraction too long. Neither of us said anything. Silence, this time, had weight. That we were both bound here, not by choice, but circumstance. Elaine was recovering from her overnight ordeal, and neither of us could leave until we knew she was safe. And yet, in that forced proximity, the tension between us was palpable. Hi, I muttered, voice rough from lack of sleep and emotion I hadn't yet named. Hi, she replied, short and clipped. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly, betraying her composure. We ended up seated near the visitor chairs, the soft hum of monitors and distant chatter filling the space between us. Neither of us moved to sit too close, but neither of us left. That IT was here. In the quiet, that small truths began to surface. Linda's exasperation softened slightly when she noticed my fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. My usually impenetrable calm was cracked by her presence, and I couldn't hide it. This was bigger than I realized, she said finally, almost to herself. I nodded. It always is, until it lands on you. And just like that, a fragile understanding began to form, not through words, but proximity. In this waiting, this unwilling togetherness, emotions we had both tried to suppress began to stir. Respect, curiosity, something heavier, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared humanity. Even so, fear lingered. Fear of vulnerability. Fear that speaking might undo the fragile balance. Fear that allowing ourselves to care, even slightly, might change everything. Asterisk somewhere in the midst of it, a tiny smile passed between us. Not triumph, not relief, just recognition. Asterisk we were forced here by circumstance. But maybe, just maybe, this proximity could teach us more than distance ever had. Asterisk Elaine's room smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon cleaner. The soft hum of the heart monitor was the only constant, ticking away a rhythm that made every second feel heavier. Asterisk Linda and I lingered near the window, half watching the city lights blink in the distance. She finally spoke, her voice low, almost confessional. Asterisk, I didn't tell him. I never told him, she admitted. Years ago, Daniel, before all this, I made a choice that hurt him. I thought I was protecting him, but I wasn't. I just left him to figure it out. Her hands trembled as she reached for the windowsill, gripping it like she could hold back time. I swallowed hard, heart tight. The weight of her admission pressed down, not just because of what she'd done, but because I understood all too well the loneliness of carrying a secret and pretending it didn't exist. Asterisk, you left him? I asked softly, almost to myself. Asterisk Linda's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed fully. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought he'd hate me less if I walked away quietly. Asterisk had hit me then. This wasn't just a story of near tragedy. It was years of unspoken choices, of missed chances. Every moment we'd resisted each other, every silence, every step back, it all led here. A confrontation with truth. Asterisk Elaine stirred in her bed, eyes fluttering open. The first thing she saw was Linda, standing awkwardly in the corner. And in that glance, something fragile began to shift. Trust, maybe, or at least recognition. Asterisk I realized, suddenly, that the emotional stakes were higher than I'd allowed myself to admit. This wasn't about gratitude or duty. This was about acknowledging the lives we've touched, intentionally or not, and the consequences we carry silently. Asterisk Linda's confession hung in the air like smoke. And in that quiet, I felt it, the weight of witnessing someone's truth, the responsibility of staying present. Asterisk if you felt the sting of a truth left unsaid, or the ache of someone leaving before you could explain, know that staying with the story matters. Watching, feeling, remembering. Subscribing to Golden Heart Stories is like choosing to witness life in all its fragile, human moments. Asterisk Elaine's hand twitched slightly, reaching for the bed rail. I remember him, she whispered. Daniel, he saved me. Asterisk Linda blinked. He saved you. Asterisk, yes, Elaine replied. And I think he might be more than just a stranger who helped. Asterisk the room felt smaller, heavier. Secrets, confessions, and gratitude collided in a space too quiet to contain the emotion. The past and present intertwined, forcing all of us to confront the truths we'd buried and the courage it takes to face them. Asterisk that night, Linda didn't sleep. Neither did I. The backstory had opened a wound, but it was also starting to stitch something new, an understanding. A fragile bridge between past mistakes and a future that still might hold connection. Asterisk morning light filtered softly through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the hospital floor. The sterile scent had faded slightly, replaced with the faint aroma of coffee and the warmth of people who had chosen to stay. Asterisk I found Linda sitting near Elaine's bed, sketching something in a small notebook, careful lines, hesitant shading. I didn't interrupt. She didn't look up. Asterisk finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I think I've been afraid of letting anyone see the real me. All these years. Afraid that if I did, they'd leave, or worse, judge. Asterisk I sat down beside her, leaving a careful distance between us. You're not alone in that. Most of us hide, thinking it protects others, but really, it just keeps us isolated. Asterisk for the first time, the space between us felt safe enough to admit small truths. The moments we'd resisted, our silent tension, our guarded hearts, were yielding to something gentler, something tender. Asterisk Elaine stirred slightly, opening her eyes to watch us. You too. You're both holding back, she said softly, almost like an observer of our unspoken truths. I see it. And maybe it's time to stop. Asterisk Linda's shoulders relaxed slightly, the notebook falling open on her lap. She glanced at me, vulnerability flickering in her eyes. I didn't expect this, she admitted. Not after yesterday. Not after all that's happened. Asterisk I reached out instinctively, offering a hand over hers. She hesitated, then let it rest there. The simple connection, skin against skin, warmth against cold, spoke louder than anything words could. Asterisk we laughed quietly at nothing in particular, the kind of shared humor that emerges only when people feel safe. It wasn't full joy, not yet, but it was hope. Asterisk somewhere in that laughter, in those small shared moments, I felt a shift. The walls we had built around ourselves, careful and deliberate, were starting to crack. Not completely, but enough to let light in. Asterisk, and yet, there was a subtle tension in the air, a quiet warning that this peace wasn't permanent. That life, circumstance, and fear could still intrude at any moment. Asterisk, but for now, the quiet connection was enough. Enough to feel alive, seen, and perhaps capable of love at last. Asterisk the afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the hospital corridor. Everything felt calm. Too calm. Asterisk, and then it broke. Asterisk Linda's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and paled. The message was short, cold, and precise. Asterisk, you're making a mistake. Stay away from him. Don't ruin what's meant to be. Asterisk her hand trembled as she showed me. The words weren't signed, but we both knew. Someone had been watching, someone who wanted to keep us apart. Asterisk I felt a heat rise in my chest. Not anger at her, not even fear, but something heavier, frustration. The fragile trust we'd been building, the small connection we'd nurtured, it now felt threatened by forces outside our control. Asterisk Linda shook her head. I can't. I shouldn't. Asterisk you shouldn't what? I asked quietly. Care? Stay? Try. Asterisk, I shouldn't get involved. Not with him. Not now. It's complicated. Her voice cracked despite her effort to sound strong. Asterisk it was that word, complicated, that cut deepest. She didn't realize that complications had always been my life. That messy, fragile, unpredictable connections were exactly the things worth holding on to. Asterisk we both fell silent, letting the words hang. The hospital lights hummed. The beeping monitors punctuated the quiet. Asterisk, and then Elaine stirred, weakly but enough to speak. You can't run from this, she whispered. Not after he saved me. And not after you two almost. Asterisk she trailed off, sensing the tension that had exploded between us. Asterisk I turned to Linda, my voice lower now, rougher. Do you realize what we almost found? Asterisk she looked down, swallowing. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. I don't want to be hurt again. Asterisk the weight of her fear collided with my own. Our fragile bond, trust that had been growing moment by moment, now threatened to shatter completely. One wrong word, one withheld truth, and it could all fall apart. Asterisk I stepped back slightly, letting the tension breathe. If this is the lowest point, then we have a choice, I said quietly. Do we let fear win? Or do we fight for what could be real? Asterisk her eyes filled with tears. Hers, mine, they mirrored each other. Asterisk the world outside the hospital corridor didn't care about our fragility, our history, or the moments we'd almost shared. But inside, the consequences felt absolute. Asterisk it was the darkest point yet, the moment where we both questioned whether connection, trust, and love were worth the risk. And for the first time, we both understood how close we were to losing it before it even began. Asterisk the corridor was quiet, nearly deserted now. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, echoing the tension that had taken root between us. Linda sat alone on the window ledge, staring out at the city lights that shimmered like distant promises. I lingered a few feet away, my hands tucked into my coat pockets, unsure whether to step closer or stay hidden in my own hesitation. Asterisk we had reached the point where silence was no longer protection. It was a test of pride, of vulnerability, and of courage. Asterisk she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do this. Asterisk, you can, I said gently, taking a step forward. I've watched you face fear before. I've seen you survive the moments that should have broken you. This isn't different. Asterisk, her eyes glistened. It feels different. Because if I try and fail, I can't go back to being the same person. Asterisk, I shook my head slowly. Maybe you don't go back. Maybe you move forward. Maybe we move forward. Asterisk, she swallowed, as if my words were both an invitation and a challenge. The weight of everything, past mistakes, unspoken truths, the barriers we had built, pressed down. Asterisk, then came the moment of decision. I held out my hand, not forceful, not demanding, just a quiet offer. I'm not asking you to leap blindly. I'm asking you to trust me. With this moment. With us. Asterisk, she stared at it, trembling. Fear warred with hope. Pride warred with longing. The choice hung between us, fragile as glass. Asterisk, finally, slowly, she placed her hand in mine. Not a victory, not a guarantee, but a commitment to see, to try, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable together. Asterisk, in that simple act, the tension began to ease. It didn't erase the past. It didn't promise a flawless future, but it created a space where love, tentative and quiet, could exist. We stood together, hands clasped, breathing in unison, listening to the quiet pulse of the hospital and the city beyond. In the stillness, a fragile peace settled. The first rays of morning sunlight spilled across the hospital floor, warm and forgiving. The city outside had begun to stir, but inside, a quiet had settled that was deeper than anything either of us had felt in years. Linda and I walked together down the corridor. Side by side, our hands still intertwined. It was not the bold triumph of a movie scene. It was quieter, intimate, real. The kind of peace built slowly, carefully, from shared vulnerability. Elaine was awake, sitting in her chair by the window. She smiled at us, a small, knowing expression. I think you two finally figured it out, she said softly. Linda squeezed my hand. We did. It just took a long time to stop resisting. I nodded. We weren't wrong to resist. It just took us both the courage to let go of fear. And in that moment, the past, the mistakes, the missed opportunities, the silent departures echoed back. But instead of pain, it carried a subtle sweetness, redemption, understanding, and the quiet triumph of connection. As we left the hospital together, I caught Linda's gaze. You know, I said, sometimes silence can be louder than words, but it's never too late to speak when it matters most. She smiled, softly, almost teasing. And sometimes, staying is braver than leaving. The city outside seemed different now. The streets, the lights, the distant hum of life, they didn't feel like obstacles. They felt like possibilities. And just as the memory of that first night, the TV click, the pointed words, the quiet departure, surfaced again, we realized something. The moments we thought were endings had actually been beginnings. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt the weight of silence, the courage to forgive, or the beauty of a second chance, staying connected matters. Choosing to follow Golden Heart Stories is more than subscribing. It's being part of the quiet witness to lives transformed, love rediscovered, and hearts reopened. Linda glanced at me as we stepped into the sunlight. I guess we're finally here. I nodded, smiling. Here. And together. The world continued around us, noisy and demanding as ever. But in the space between us, in our quiet understanding, there was victory, there was hope, and there was love at last. The sun was high now, spilling golden light over the streets as Linda and I walked quietly through the city. The world continued, chaotic and loud, but we carried a private peace between us, a reminder that love sometimes arrives in the spaces we least expect. Elaine waved from the hospital doorway, a small smile of gratitude lingering on her lips. The past, with all its mistakes and silence, felt lighter now. Redemption isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply choosing to stay, to forgive, and to let yourself be seen. And as you sit there, holding this story in your heart, remember, some moments in life demand that we witness them fully. Choosing to stay with stories like this, to follow Golden Heart Stories, is more than a click. It's an acknowledgement that second chances, courage, and love at last are worth believing in. Take a deep breath. Reflect on the quiet moments you've avoided, the words you've left unsaid, and the opportunities to let love in. And if your heart says yes, Let this story guide you to stay, to witness, and to open yourself to the beauty of connection, because every heart deserves a second chance, and every story, a listener who doesn't walk away.